Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of KaijuVFX. Today we're going to be looking at the puppet pin tool as requested by Whalezilla and Gojira Legionnaire. And here's what the final product of today's project is going to look like. So this tutorial will be split up into two parts. In the first part here, we'll be taking a look at the puppet pin tool and making Earthtron right here roar and do all that good stuff. And then in the second part, we'll look into creating that sort of advanced flame breath attack that he does. So let's get started. So as you can see in this very first little composition here, Earthtron has no arms. Yeah, I took them out of his sockets, and if we look at some of these other clips that we have in here, we have those are his arms. So the puppet pin tool essentially is going to allow us to bend and contort this Bandai vinyl Earthtron in ways that you normally would not be able to. So the first thing we're going to do here is take these arm layers and just draw a simple mask around the edges of them. There we go. So now we have these different layers for Earthtron's arms. And so next we're going to key out the Earthtron footage. So we'll take this main Earthtron footage layer here, since that has the most variety of things to watch for keying in. We'll search for the key light effect, put that on there, take the eyedrop effect, choose a desaturated darkish green color, play around with the clip black and white, just to make sure that we wind up with no translucency in the figure and no gray spots in the background and such. So that looks about right. We've got Earthtron completely white there, so we can go back to final result now and switch that to hard color. And we'll bring the screen softness up to about 1.2, and then the screen shrink and grow to about -1.1, we'll say. And then we'll copy that key light effect to Earthtron's arm. So we'll just paste that on there. And there we go. All of Earthtron is keyed out. And if we unsolo these, I've already readied the rest of the scene for us. So we've got Earthtron standing in the city here. And we're going to have him roar a little bit and fire off a heat ray. So let's name these layers. First, this layer, which is the foreground arm of Earthtron. So we'll just name that arm front. And then here we have the back arm, so we'll call that arm back. And then we'll call this other layer Earthtron base. So we're going to want to move this back arm layer behind the Earthtron base so that, well, this arm will be, behind Earthtron. And, well, as you can see right now, the arms are a little oversized, so to say, for this Earthtron figure. So what we're going to want to do is we'll take these and we'll press Y to click the pan behind tool, and we'll take that anchor point for these layers and move them to right about the center of the shoulder, essentially. What that'll allow us to do is scale and rotate the object around that anchor point, which is going to make animating Earthtron a lot easier later on. So we are bringing the scale down of Earthtron right now. We'll play around with this a little bit. Maybe 70 or so. Maybe a little lower. Try 66. That is looking about right. We'll play around with the scale of the other arm too. Try 66 there. Although this one's behind Earthtron, so we're going to want that to be a little smaller, so we'll go at maybe 60 or so. And we'll also move the anchor point to the middle of the shoulder as well for that layer. Put that roughly where the shoulder would be on the other side of Earthtron. That's looking about right. So now we've got Earthtron's arms, and you can sort of see what we're going to be doing here. So by setting the anchor points of Earthtron's arms to be by the shoulder sockets, we can easily rotate these arms in any way possible without having to do any sort of stop motion animation and such. So now we're going to start playing around with the puppet pin tool. We're going to use the puppet pin tool right up here. You can press Control P to get that easily, or you can just click up here. And this is the puppet pin tool. So if you click on a still image, it'll auto trace the image and you get a little point. And you might try and do something with that initially, but if you only have one pinpoint, you're not going to do anything. You're just going to move the entire image around. So what you have to do is create multiple points all throughout the image, sort of different areas that you want to be able to bend the image. So I've put some around crucial points like the head right here, the neck, the upper torso, the lower torso, the thigh, and the lower leg, and then 2 separate points near the bottom of the tail. Although his tail's not in this shot, so we're not going to be moving that. These are simply for stability purposes. So now we can sort of take these puppet pin things and bend them around a little bit, and you can now sort of start to see how this entire effect is going to be coming together. So we'll click on the Earthtron base layer and press U to bring up all of the keyframes. And as you can see here, we have keyframes for each and every individual puppet pin. So what I'd like to do initially is have all these puppet pins at the base position at the very beginning. So we'll select all these, go back to the very beginning, and drag all those to the very start of the clip. And now before we get to animating Earthtron's puppet pins and stuff all around, there's one more thing that we have to do real quick. So right now we're going to duplicate that Earthtron base layer and get rid of the puppet pin tool. And we're going to call this Earthtron mouth. And so something cool that you can do while playing with the puppet pin tool, you can do this in any situation really if you play around with it. But what we're going to do is detach the mouth from Earthtron essentially, so that we can move that about as we please, because this is a Bandai vinyl, which means that by itself you can't get any movement out of the mouth without playing around with the figure and stuff. So what we're going to want to do is take the mask tool, press G, we'll zoom in here, and we'll begin drawing a mask around the bottom jaw. So we'll go down here, go around the fang. We've got some teeth here. Go around those just so we make sure that we get all those. And once we do all that, we'll leave a bit of space back there for when we rotate the jaw around. And so now if we solo that layer, you can see that we've got Earthtron's jaw. But one thing that you'll notice is that we've got this little gap right here from when we had to mask out Earthtron's fang. So what we can do is we're going to duplicate that mouth layer, and we'll draw a rectangular mask around, say, this area right here. And we'll delete that first mask because we won't need anything else. So we'll set this second mouth layer behind the first one, and then we'll draw another mask going around that. And we will set this mask to subtract. And we'll go back onto this first Earthtron layer and play around with the mask a little bit here because there's a bit of tan showing from that fang still. So we'll just move all this around. Keep that point around there maybe. And then play around with the mask here again. And we'll bring the feathering here up to about 1, we'll say. And so that doesn't look absolutely perfect, but this sort of gives us a little base that we can use for Earthtron's bottom jaw. So we have these 2 layers that make up the bottom jaw now, and what we're going to do is we're going to pre-compose those. So we'll move all attributes into the composition. And there we go. Now we have both parts of the bottom jaw on one seamless pre-comp. But as you can see, when we move that back, you can still see that the bottom jaw is on the other Earthtron layer. So we'll disable this pre-comp for now. We'll rename it to mouth. We'll unclick the eye on that. And on this Earthtron base layer, we are going to do sort of the opposite mask that we did with the bottom jaw. We're going to create a mask around the top part of the mouth. So we'll wind up masking around the fang here, all of these top rows of teeth. Make sure that we get all those. And there we go. We've masked that out, and then we'll change that mask to subtract. Change the feathering to about 2 or so, maybe just 1 for that one actually. Yeah, 1 just looks fine. So now if we turn on that mouth layer, and we'll bring that below the base so that the fang is still going through that. And then we'll press Y for the pan around tool, and we'll move the anchor point to that part of the bottom jaw. Now if we rotate it, there you go. You can see we're getting some mouth movement out of Earthtron that you otherwise can't get with a normal Bandai figure. And we'll go in here real quick actually, and just polish up the mask a little bit around the bottom jaw. So we'll add another point there, make this part a little bit more flat so we don't have that part jutting out. Bring this backward a little bit so it just gives us a little bit more wiggle room when we're playing around with the jaw. Since this is behind the base Earthtron layer, none of this stuff should be showing. So there we go. Now we can move the bottom jaw for Earthtron around and rotate that however we wish, really. And we can make him roar and do all that cool stuff. So now we're going to get to animating Earthtron's puppet points. So right here at the very beginning, we have Earthtron in the same base position that the footage was in the first place. And if you remember, obviously, we're going to be moving these points all around and stuff to make Earthtron roar and shoot out a flame attack. So we'll just go forward to about a second. Maybe have Earthtron just sort of hunch down a little bit like he's getting ready for a roar. And we'll play around with these puppet points. Maybe make his stomach and throat pull back a little bit. And then we'll go forward a couple of frames. Move these points so that Earthtron is looking up and roaring. We'll bring his stomach out a little bit as he's letting out that bellow. Move the head back a little bit maybe. We'll move forward a little bit to give time for Earthtron's roar to finish. We'll bring the head back a little bit more, throw it out a little bit more, gut out a little bit more. And then we'll go forward about another half of a second or so, and we'll bring him back to sort of a resting position. And then for a little bit, we'll have him sit there as he charges up his flame attack. Maybe have his stomach begin bulging outward as the flames are sort of building up inside of him. And then in a couple of frames, we'll have Earthtron lean forward and expel all of those flames across the city. Move forward a little bit. Move his head up as he's moving his flame breath around. Change the back a little bit. And then we'll bring Earthtron back to another resting position at the very end. So previewing this, here's what it looks like so far. And as you can see, it looks a little choppy, so we'll probably play around with the timing of all these puppet pinpoints a little bit. And also something that I like to do is I like to select all of the puppet pinpoints so that they're all selected in the timeline, and then we'll press F9, which makes those all easy ease frames. And what that does is essentially every time that there's a keyframe, After Effects will automatically ease the motion of whatever it is you're animating into that keyframe. So it'll start out moving slow, speed up in the middle of the keyframe, and then slow down again as it comes to a stop at the very end here. And that helps to make everything look a lot more smooth. We'll play around with the timing of these a little bit. You can always do that to your liking. I'll just take a second to do that. Alright, so I've played around with the timing of all the puppet pin stuff and made sure it all looked decently smooth. Obviously, if you spend a lot more time perfecting the puppet pin animation, you can get something that looks a little bit better. This is just the result of wanting to basically show you how all of this is done. So obviously, as you can see throughout this animation, the mouth and arms don't move with Earthtron. So we need to fix that. But it's all very easy thanks to the fact that we have the anchor points set to where exactly they need to be. So on the mouth, we'll keyframe the rotation and the position. I'll press U so that we can see both of those keyframes. And we'll essentially go to each of these puppet pin keyframes and move the mouth around to wherever we want it to be. So here we go. As we can see now, we've got Earthtron's lower jaw moving with him as he roars and does his flame attack and all that good stuff. And now we just have to do the same thing with the arms, so I'll just go ahead and do all that real quick. Alright, so now we've got the arms moving along with Earthtron, and we're starting to get Earthtron's entire movements basically exactly how we want them to. But before we go and say that we're done with Earthtron roaring and all that stuff, there's still a couple of things that we can do with the keyframes here to really give a little bit more realism and character to Earthtron. So the first thing that I like to do is take the mouth keyframes and with the rotation keyframes during the time that Earthtron is roaring. So these three keyframes right here, I like to select these and go to the wiggler here and play around with these settings, say maybe like 21 and 2 or so. And we'll apply the wiggle effect to Earthtron's mouth here. And what that does is it quite literally wiggles Earthtron's mouth around as he's roaring, which sort of gives it that much more oomph as he's roaring, and you really feel like he's letting out a huge cry. So we'll do that there, as well as with these keyframes with his mouth right here. We'll set those maybe to 3 because that's when he's releasing his flame breath attacks. That's obviously going to be a little bit more intense. And another thing that I want to play around with these keyframes is on the arm keyframes, because as you can see right now, the arms are both moving in absolute unison, because that's just how I make sure that all the keyframes are timed right and such. But what I like to do is play around with the rotation a little bit and offset some of these keyframes on one of the arms and such, maybe not on parts where they're both moving pretty rapidly. But generally we'll just sort of play around with those, offset all those a fair bit, a little bit each. So yeah, now as you can see, it's very subtle, but it really does make a big difference. Now as you can see, Earthtron's arms are not moving perfectly in sync. The front one here is sometimes behind a little bit or in front a little bit, so that really helps to add a little bit more realism to this. So we're almost done here. There's just a couple more things that I usually like to do. So right now Earthtron is completely non-color corrected at all, and there's a couple things that we're going to do to make him fit in a lot more with the scene. The first of all is we're going to take this Earthtron base layer and duplicate that, and we'll delete this mask on the layer, and we'll go to the very beginning where Earthtron was in his base position, because we're going to create another mask. We're going to make one around his eye here, so we'll just draw a simple mask just around the eye right here. Set the feathering of that to maybe 2 pixels, and then we'll add well, first let's name this layer so we know what it is. We'll call that Earthtron Eye, and then we'll apply a glow effect to this eye, and we'll play around with the threshold a little bit. 45 seems decent. Play around with the radius a little bit. Yeah, and this just sort of helps give Earthtron a little bit more character. You know, a lot of the times on the actual suits in the various Ultra shows and Tokusatsu series, the eyes of the kaiju and stuff will actually glow quite a bit. And by doing this, it just sort of helps us to replicate the show a little bit more, and it makes the effect just look a little bit better in the end. So that looks pretty good there. And then we're going to color correct the rest of Earthtron to match the area that he's in right now. It's a very bright day outside, perfect for destruction, but Earthtron here just sort of looks odd placed in this situation because he's not brightened at all. So we'll go to the Earthtron base and we'll add a curves effect, and we'll bring up the brightness a little bit, bring down the contrast just a tad, bring down the red a tiny bit, and then same with the green. And then we'll bring up the blue a tiny bit, maybe bring up the brightness a little bit more. And yeah, so that sort of helps Earthtron look a little bit more natural in this scene, so to say. So you can see a bit of before and after right there. And so we'll just take that curves effect, copy that, and paste it on the front arm, the mouth, and the back arm. So there we go. Now Earthtron matches a little bit more with the actual scene here. But we're still not done with this effect yet. There's still a couple more things that we can do that'll really help make this effect shine. So first of all, we're going to take all of these Earthtron layers and apply motion blur. And obviously we click up here to enable that motion blur, and you can see how that's affecting it variously here. However, this will take a little bit more to preview. So that essentially finishes off the effect. The one thing that I've done, and this is totally optional, I just enjoy doing this because it adds a lot more power, so to say, to the roar, is we have an adjustment layer right here on top of all the other layers, which means that any effects that are applied to this layer are going to also be applied to every single layer below, all just on one simple layer. So we've added a CC radial fast blur effect, and we have the center animated and the amount animated over time to follow Earthtron's mouth and sort of add this blur effect as it goes out from Earthtron's mouth, and that sort of gives his roar a lot more power to it, so to say. And throughout the timeline here, I've just added a wiggle effect with a magnitude of about 15 to make the blur pulsate a little bit as Earthtron is roaring, and then it dissipates out as he closes his mouth at the very end here. But yeah, that finishes off Earthtron roaring, and that's it for this part of the effect. Part 2, we will focus on the flame breath that will be going right here. So stay tuned for that. Part 2 will also cover camera shake for this part of the roar as well, since we didn't get to see this part. But yeah, that will come out next week. So stay tuned next Tuesday for part 2 of this KaijuVFX. I'll see you guys then.